your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.
Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, planet Earth, North America, the United States of America, California, Los Angeles to be specific. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of, well, it's interesting today because I'm not really sure what to title today's program. Is this an episode of Agree to Disagree here on the TNAM radio network here at TheNewAmericanMedia.com, or is this the Unhappy Hour, the only Cleveland-centric, Los Angeles-based sports show that I'm currently aware of? Well, you know, this story has a little bit of everything. It has a little bit of cover-ups, has a little bit of jumping to conclusions, it has a little bit of anger, a little bit of vitriol, a little bit of re-examining history. It has a lot of sports, it has a lot of intrigue, a lot of disgusting accusations, and now, well, we're wondering if the Jerry Sandusky story might be what you think it is. So this could be an Agree to Disagree show about current events or / politics, etc. Or this could be a sports show about Penn State football, Joe Paterno, and a whole lot more. So I don't really know what you're listening to, but I do know it's the New American Media. Like I said, I'm Brian Engelman. I'm your host. Thank you for checking us out. A couple of quick things. Want you to subscribe, youtube.com/TheNewAmericanMedia. Want you to go to TheNewAmericanMedia.com, and on the right-hand side has our Facebook and our Twitter links. Twitter, we're at American_media_. And it has the TNAM radio button. That's where you click play to listen to this show live every time that we're on. But definitely go on the YouTube channel, subscribe, and join us. I don't know, we're at like 1,030,000 views or something. A lot of good conversations, a lot of good videos and interviews and radio shows and stuff over the past 5 years. So hopefully you can check us out over there. But our friends Mark Claire and John Odermatt of Lions of Liberty, you make sure you go check them out as well. Everywhere. They're all over the place. What are they selling? Make Liberty Great Again hats? Yeah, I had the mock-ups for Make Cleveland Sports Great Again. Those hats. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. So if someone wants to do that, hey, we're now teammates. Make it happen. But anyway, yeah, go check out Mark Claire and John Odermatt of Lions of Liberty. But we're very connected. We've done their shows. They've done our shows over the past few years. And they have a Penn State connection, and it keeps popping up on their timeline. They're interviewing this guy, John Ziegler, and he's talking about the Jerry Sandusky situation, the criminal case, what we think we know it is, and they've said they've totally changed their minds after talking with John. And I said, really? All right, I'm intrigued. It's got sports, it's got everything. I want to dig into this story, so I got connected with John Ziegler.
John Ziegler.
Hello, John. It's Brian Engelman, and you are live on the air. Thank you for joining us on the New American Media today.
Good to talk to you, Brian.
Well, hey, you know, like I told you in a bit of the pre-production opportunity we had to talk, I said we do a sports show and a political show or current events show, and I'm not really sure what this qualifies under, so I want to welcome you to the program. Before we get into this, covering the sports angle, the newsworthiness angle, real quick, I did introduce people by saying that Mark Claire and John Odermatt from Lions of Liberty, they're the ones where we first kind of started finding out that this John Ziegler guy is really doing some research here and winning over, convincing some people that I hold with a high esteem as far as they examine the facts and come to logical conclusions most of the time. So first off, can you kind of introduce yourself to the people that don't know you as well as the Lions of Liberty crew?
Well, my background is rather unusual in that I'm certainly no celebrity, but I'm, I guess, notorious for a lot of different elements of my career. Basically, the way I am described now is I host a nationally syndicated Sunday night radio talk show, which is mostly political. I'm a political conservative libertarian. I also write a column for Mediaite, which is Dan Abrams' a media-focused website. I write about 3 or 4 times a week for them. And I believe the reason why we're talking is because I also run several websites, but the most prominent is www.framingpaterno.com. .com, which, by the way, the framing there is figurative. It's not literal. This is not a conspiracy theory. In fact, I'm the only non-conspiracy person that's really looked at this case, because everybody else believes in a massive conspiracy. My theory makes a hell of a lot more sense, and there's no conspiracy. But bottom line is I have no connection at all to Penn State. I went to Georgetown. I grew up as a Notre Dame fan. I did grow up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, so I was certainly well aware of Joe Paterno and Penn State. But I'm also a documentary filmmaker, has made a couple of very prominent documentary films about the news media. And I knew immediately, back in November of 2011, when this story broke nationally, that something was amiss and that the news media was incredibly vulnerable for blowing the story. What I didn't realize at the time, Brian, was that they would blow the entire story. I had presumed that the Joe Paterno element was the part that they were really creating chaos over and convicting a man with no evidence after a 61-year exemplary career at Penn State, and destroying this man and having him get fired within 5 days of the release of a 23-page grand jury presentment, the essence of which we now know is almost complete balderdash. So that part of my instincts were correct on. What I didn't realize until much, much later, having spent most of the last 5 years investigating this case and knowing more about it than anybody else, including Jerry Sandusky himself, what I didn't realize was that not only is Joe Paterno innocent, not only is Penn State innocent, but Jerry Sandusky is also innocent, and that's the only explanation that makes this entire story make sense, as shocking as that may be to people who have not followed it, because the news media is completely 100% invested in a false narrative fairy tale. I refer to them as 5-year-olds believing in Santa Claus. They're that invested in this fairy tale, and they see every piece of information through the prism of a false view of this case. And they're not smart, they're not experts, they are completely in the tank for one particular version of the story, and no one has the balls to look at the other side. And there's a very, very compelling other side, which is that everybody here was innocent.
You know, I'm pulling up this story here. You got me thinking about it, John. Text messages. This is off a site called Bro Bible. So whenever you're checking out sites like this that I'm not as familiar with, I'll take it with a grain of salt. But you find something here in the sports world, but you start hearing the rumors. You're so right, John. Like you said, something was off from this case from the beginning. Your spidey senses told you the way that the facts were coming out, being presented, something was off. And so when you check, and this is such a good piece of advice for anybody in the social media age with Twitter and Facebook. Don't just retweet stuff. Don't just share things on Facebook and get angry. Take a second, step back, and learn about the case. I've said that for Trayvon Martin. I've said that with Mike Brown. I'm saying it about almost all of these cases. You should always do that. But it just reminded me of something, John, because I'm a Ohio State Buckeye fan, so I have no love for Penn State or Joe Paterno particularly.
Sure.
No hatred either. It's not that team up north. So you know, it's whatever. He's in a totally different. He's fine. But anyway, Ezekiel Elliott was been accused of a few different things, and now I'm starting to see this spilling out about text messages showing the girl asking her friends to lie to the police and say that the former Ohio State running back beat her. Now, I'm not confirming that this is a fact. I'm just saying I'm starting to hear these stories. So before I rush to judgment, I think it's something to slow down and consider. But you were saying right away, everybody was quick within 5 days to rush to judgment and take Joe Paterno out to the trash. There are so many angles to this. But let me ask you this, John. What do you think what was the first thing that got your spidey senses tingling to say this story isn't right?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Michael Brown, because I think there's a lot of this story that's very similar to Hands Up, Don't Shoot. Hands Up, Don't Shoot is a very compelling and dramatic narrative that makes people lose their minds, right? Oh, my God. There was a black man who had his hands up and said, "Don't shoot," to a police officer, and then he basically got assassinated or executed. That's infuriating, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we now know that didn't happen, and the only reason why that got into the media narrative was that one of his friends said that in a compelling fashion to a TV station, and obviously the media loved that narrative. It fit everything they wanted, so they bought into it. It got traction. It exploded, and Hands Up, Don't Shoot became, it still is to this day, an anthem for the entire Black Lives Matter movement, to the point where it was NFL players in St. Louis were giving up the Hands Up, Don't Shoot before a game last year, and this was all make-believe. Well, very similarly, you have the Mike McQuery allegation with regard to Penn State and Joe Paterno. Because what happened in November of 2011 is that we were told that a graduate assistant coach named Mike McQuery, 10 years earlier, although we were told at the time 9 years earlier, but that's an important part of the story, which I'll get to later. We were told that in the year 2002, we were told that Mike McQuery had witnessed Jerry Sandusky raping a young boy, and that he told Joe Paterno about it, and that basically nothing happened after that. Well, that's an outrageous story. That is something that will make anybody's head explode, right? It's also a story that makes no sense at any level. And I knew this, one, because I'm a human being. It doesn't make sense from a human standpoint. But I've coached high school football. I've covered college football. I've covered pro football. There is no way in the world, even if Joe Paterno was a fraud, which I don't believe he was in any way, shape, or form, there's no way in the world that story makes any sense. Mike McQuery is I think 27, 28-year-old, 6'4", 6'5", guy with well over 200 pounds, in great shape, and he's fully clothed, and he sees a naked old guy raping a boy, and he doesn't. His story is that he looks at it for 3 seconds and then leaves without saying anything. Doesn't identify the boy. Doesn't stop Sandusky. Doesn't say anything to Sandusky. Doesn't beat the crap out of Sandusky. Doesn't save the boy from the situation. Never says anything to the police. We never hear about this for 9 years. That's an absurd story on its face. Not to mention, there's a whole bunch of other elements of that are politically incorrect to talk about, but it's just an absurd story from the very start. Well, then, that's what got my as you say, spidey senses going, because I'm like, wait a minute. How is this even possible?
Well, what are some of the other? How did you just phrase it? Less politically correct angles. What are some of those too?
Well, the idea, the less politically correct angle is when you know the logistics of what Mike McQuery is alleged to have not. By the way, he didn't even claim to have witnessed it. He claimed we now know that he heard slapping sounds, looked through a mirror for 2 or 3 seconds, and decided to slam a locker door and then left. The reality is that the actual act that McQuery was reported incorrectly as having witnessed, for the record, he never testified to that. His most recent testimony has made it clear he never saw an anal rape. It made it very clear to that. And by the way, Jerry Sandusky was found not guilty on that particular charge, mostly because there was no accuser that testified. That's the number one thing in this case that people need to know. There was no accuser that testified in that episode. And the reason was because we know who the kid in the shower was, Brian. His name was Alan Myers. And he, on the day Joe Paterno was fired, made it very clear in a full-length statement to an FBI-trained investigator, former police officer, which I have at our website, framingpaterno.com, and it's in many things that I've written, this blockbuster statement that he was the guy there, the kid there. He, by the way, makes this statement as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps with his mother by his side, and he comes in and says, look, I'm the guy. I don't understand what the hell Mike McQuery is talking about. These are all the things that Jerry Sandusky and I did before and for many, many years after this episode. He's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I remember that night. Nothing happened. Jerry told me Penn State might call me a couple weeks later to find out what the hell was going on. They never did. I never thought about it again. And Mike McQuery's lying. And oh, by the way, I've been interviewed by police, and I felt like they were trying to get me to lie about Jerry Sandusky, who I'll never say anything bad about. These are all the words of the guy who was there. he doesn't testify because the prosecution obviously doesn't want a guy who has made that statement to be their prime key witness in the Mike McQuery episode. Well, what happens after Joe Paterno gets fired and the whole world changes is that this guy, Alan Myers, gets an attorney by the name of Andrew Shubin, who had represented him in 2 DUIs in the previous year and a half. By the way, his mother happened to have worked for Andrew Shubin, and Andrew Shubin flips Alan Myers into a quote-unquote victim. He never testifies because the prosecution doesn't like his story, and the defense doesn't know what the hell he's going to say. So you have the key episode in the whole case, the one everybody knows. Oh, Penn State assistant coach saw rape in the shower and told Joe Paterno did nothing. All of that is false. And by the way, McQuery not only doesn't do anything, this incredibly important episode in his life, right? Brian, if you saw a local legend raping or doing anything obviously sexual with a young boy in a shower, and let's say you did for some reason panic and run away, I think you might remember the year in which it happened. You
certainly would remember whether that year was before or after 9/11.
Well, okay, you know what?
Mind,
that's a really good point, because I was just sitting here as a sports fan going, well, look, I can think back to Albert Bell and Kenny Lofton, Carlos Baerga. I can think back to, a whole bunch of great players on great teams, Roberto Alomar, and then you go, well, wait, was that 2001 or are we talking? Hang on, was that 97 or 90? But like you just said, that was clearly before 9/11. That was like one of those dates. It's either your life before or the day after the police state began. It's one or the other.
And for the record, Mike McQuery, when the crap hit the fan on this story in November 2011, his story was, and by the way, his first testimony was, that this occurred on March 1st of 2002. 2002 day. It didn't happen that month. It didn't happen that year. It was February 9th, 2001, before 9/11, when this occurred. And guess who the first person to figure out that the March 2002 date was incorrect? It was Jerry Sandusky. Sandusky knew that date could not be right because he knew that Alan Myers was with him, and he knew that that the reason why he connected Alan Myers to that event was that it had occurred just after his book had come out. Well, his book didn't come out until January 1st of 2001, a month before the episode actually occurred. So why is Jerry Sandusky the person telling his attorney correctly, wait a minute, they got the wrong year, the wrong month. This can't be right. I remember that, what happened that time, and I told Alan Myers that Penn State might call because Penn State had talked to Jerry a couple weeks after this, after McQuery comes to Paterno. And this is the part where the people who say Paterno and Penn State did nothing are full of crap. They did everything exactly what they were supposed to do. Paterno, who probably should never even been spoken to by McQuery, Paterno had no say over this. He's not even Jerry's boss. Jerry is retired for 3 years at this point. So McQuery, instead of going to police, he goes to Paterno. I think there's a good explanation for why, which I hope we'll get to, which has a direct sports relationship to it, which makes a hell of a lot more sense than the story we were told. But just let's go through what Penn State does. So Paterno gets the story, and he immediately he makes sure that the athletic director, who's his boss, and the guy who runs the campus police are both informed of this. The legal counsel for Penn State is almost immediately informed of this. Then they interview Mike McQuery, the athletic director, and the head of the campus police. They both interview Mike McQuery. The athletic director then interviews Jerry Sandusky. Sandusky tells him, look, you want to talk to the boy, go ahead. I'll be happy to have him give you his number. You can call him. In a critical mistake, Penn State, because I think they realized that this was a big nothing burger, decides not to bother the kid. Instead, they go to Jerry's boss, the Second Mile Charity, who is obvious because they're a charity for at-risk kids. They're a mandated reporter for child sex abuse. They go, Penn State informs them of this complaint about Jerry having had a shower with a naked boy that upset one of their coaches. Well, they knew who the kid was. They knew who Alan Myers was. They talked to Jerry. This was not a big secret. Because they knew it was Alan Myers, they did nothing because they knew Alan Myers was basically a son to Jerry Sandusky. which the record of this case shows for years and years. A couple years after the McQuery episode, Alan Myers, as a senior on his high school football team at West Branch High School in Pennsylvania, he has no father to stand with him, so who stands with him? Jerry Sandusky. That next spring, he asked Jerry Sandusky to speak as a commencement address speaker at his high school graduation, which Jerry does. Then, as he spends a summer attending Penn State University, Alan Myers lives with Jerry and Dottie Sandusky. He then, as a Marine, travels 10.5 hours to attend the funeral for Jerry's mother, not Jerry or Jerry's wife or Jerry's mother. 10.5 hours each way Alan Myers drives. And then when Alan Myers gets married, Alan Myers invites Jerry and Dottie to the wedding, takes a photograph with Jerry, which Jerry uses, a photograph of Jerry Sandusky and Alan Myers in his Marine uniform, as the photograph in Jerry's resignation letter from the Second Mile Charity, in which Jerry mentions Alan Myers prominently in the letter. This is when he resigns in the middle of the grand jury investigation, which we didn't know was going on at the time, which if you're a criminal mastermind, Brian, and Jerry Sandusky would have to be a criminal mastermind for this to pull off, be remotely plausible to pull off this massive 40-year cover-up. If you're a criminal mastermind, putting a photograph of you and your prime victim while naming him in a public letter is about the most asinine thing you could possibly do. It's only consistent with somebody who has nothing to fear because they know they're innocent. And the story of Alan Myers shows that the entire McQuery episode is a situation that got manipulated by investigators 10 years later. It was only 10 years later when they come to McQuery, and McQuery is convinced by investigators that Sandusky is a pedophile. Then they ask him for his help. He is, I believe, manipulated, and I believe he is more than willing to try to help them because he feels vulnerable himself, partially because he originally thought the investigators are coming to him because he had been sending pictures of his naked penis to a woman, not his wife, through a Penn State phone. And so when he finds out that that's not the reason why investigators are coming to talk to him, he's thrilled to talk about Jerry Sandusky.
Wow.
And his own testimony proves he never believed Jerry Sandusky was a pedophile until investigators came to him, because he says under oath, he says, I was telling people that Jerry shouldn't be around the locker, should be around the program. And on cross-examination, he was asked, Mike, did you start telling people that Jerry shouldn't be around the program before or after investigators came to you in late 2010 and said that Jerry Sandusky is being investigated for child sex abuse? Can you help us? And Mike McQuery said, quote, it was almost certainly after, which of course means it was after. McQuery never thought he saw a sex act until 10 years later. That's why he didn't remember the date, the month, or the year. That's why he got it wrong. Had he actually seen something criminal, he would have remembered all that. He didn't, because it was no big deal at the time. And that's the only way you can make this entire story make any sense at all.
Now, does that also go into... Man, there's a lot of information here. I'm just going to let it keep going because, like you said in pre-production, we could do a 3-hour show and not really get to all of this. So I'm just going to let you keep going. Put it all together. Well, when's your book coming out? Are you doing what's the latest?
Unfortunately, this particular story is unique in that because of the media having a unprecedented investment in a particular narrative. In any other story remotely like this, I would have a blockbuster bestseller, but I can't even get out of the batter's box on this story because, as I mentioned, and this is the best metaphor I can come up with, the entire media industrial complex is completely, totally invested in this story. This isn't like Duke Lacrosse. They put a chip or two down on Duke Lacrosse, and they said, okay, yeah, we screwed that up, and whatever. They put everything on this. They have all their chips on this.
Well, I would love to get egg on the face of ESPN. The way that the social justice warriors over at ESPN try to turn everything, whether it's Caitlyn Jenner or the ESPY Awards with, hey, LeBron James and the rest of the NBA player, taking things political and always going one direction. It's always cool to kneel down on a football field, especially if the national anthem's playing, but not if it's Tim Tebow and he's praying. Then he's a monster and an idiot, an imbecile, a flat earther, a tinfoil hat wearing clown. ESPN are a bunch of bums. Now I'm gonna tell you this. Well, I guess I'm not putting my resume in at ESPN anytime soon. Didn't realize I felt so strongly, but I do. I did a show on July 15th, 2012, saying, in the title of this is Death Penalty for Penn State Football or Jerry Sandusky. And I was just getting the highlights. I was not doing any deep investigation. It was early on into the case. And I basically said I have no use on this planet for pedophiles. I think they should be strung up. Actually, I haven't gone back to listen to this, but I believe my feelings have stayed the same. I think they should be strung up and hanged in the center, the public center, the public square, if you will. I don't really see any use for those individuals, and I pretty much probably tore Jerry Sandusky and Penn State and Joe Paterno apart over this. So I'm telling you that to give you my background, that I am heavily invested in this, only in the way that I did a show. I formed a pretty strong opinion based on what I thought was true, but I'm always willing to consider what else is going on, whether it's 9/11, what really happened to cause 9/11, whether it's JFK, whether it's ancient aliens. Go to any subject. I just want to learn the truth.
Brian, and I appreciate that, Brian, but this is not a conspiracy. In fact, this is the anti-conspiracy theory. What the news media – see, one of the many things I would love, which will never happen, is for somebody, I mean, I'm talking anybody, at ESPN or anywhere else in the major media, tell me the story from beginning to end of what you think really happened at Penn State, because it is impossible. It is impossible, based upon what they claim to believe now, about all these most recent settlement allegations, which I hope we'll get into because I can explain them all, and they're as bogus as could possibly be, and I can prove it. But I would love for somebody to tell me a story from beginning to end as to how this happened without a trace of evidence. Not a trace. We're in the midst. This is 8 years. 8 years since this investigation began. It's the most involved, intricate investigation of its type in the world. More media coverage, more investigators, more investigations of different varieties from different people over an extended period of time, and yet they can't find a shred of evidence, not only of the cover-up, but of the actual alleged crimes themselves. And if you go through which I have, every single allegation, each one is more ridiculous and absurd than the next. But no one can tell a story here.
Well, let's do
because
that.
Because hold on, this is really important. I'm the only one that doesn't involve a massive conspiracy. I actually believe there was almost no conspiracy here. I think there might have been a conspiracy between a mom and one of the accusers, the first accuser by the name of Aaron Fischer. I think that's a semi-conspiracy. I think that it's possible that a couple of other people might have had a suspicion that they were doing something wrong. But by and large, the way I describe this is that basically one guy lied, Aaron Fischer, victim number one. One guy got manipulated, Mike McQuery, and everybody else went along thinking that they were capturing the Loch Ness Monster, and oh, by the way, it was going to be good for us, either from a career standpoint or our bank account, because Penn State was giving away $100 million to the accusers of Jerry Sandusky. That's what happened here. It's not a conspiracy. It's a lie, a manipulation, and everybody else pursuing their own self-interest, trying to capture the Loch Ness Monster, a Loch Ness Monster that didn't actually exist, just like the real Loch Ness Monster.
So then basically, to go back to telling the story from beginning to end about what we think happened.
I can do it. They can't.
Aaron Fischer, walk us through the very beginning of this. You said Aaron Fischer and his mom may have been involved to lie, and then they got Mike McQuery to go along with it to destroy this man and collect $100 million.
Here's what happens. And the timeline here is really important. Okay, so here's what happens. In late 2008, Aaron Fischer is a nearly 15-year-old kid who is a wrestling star and a track star who could kick, and there's video of this, kick the ass of the 30-something neighbor of his with no problem. This is not a hopeless little boy, okay?
Would this be the exact inverse? Let me jump in. Would this be the exact inverse of the media constantly showing the angelic little baby boy picture of Trayvon Martin, when in reality he had grown up quite a bit between that picture and the person that was ground and pounded?
Very similar. The Sanduski accusers are all portrayed as being far younger than they actually were allegedly at the time. And in fact, there's an interesting dynamic, which I don't think is coincidental, that the men involved in this case, the two prosecutors, they're men. Almost everybody else in this case is a woman, which I think is really important, because I think the women were trying to think about this case as an old man sexually abusing 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, which is plausible, okay? I mean, that I'm sure happens all the time. And there's ways that can happen, both from a logistical standpoint as well as a power and physical perspective. The men in the case knew that was inherently fishy, because the men were always trying to lie about how old these kids were, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, because they know a post-puberty heterosexual boy who has never been given alcohol, never been given drugs. There's, by the way, not one accusation of either of those in this entire case, because Jerry didn't drink and Jerry didn't do drugs. And there's no allegations of a payoff. So if you're going to get a 14-year-old boy to, and let's be clear what the allegation in the Aaron Fischer situation is, oral sex 100 times with a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. If you're going to do that with no drugs, no alcohol, no payoff, and by the way, no physical abuse, no allegations of Jerry hitting the kid or strapping him up, nothing remotely like that. And that kid's heterosexual, which every single one of these accusers is very heterosexual. Aaron Fischer was having sex with girls at the age of 12 years old, according to his friends. Girls, lots of them. So you mean that you come on, you're male. You tell me what heterosexual boy who's a physically fit, strong at 14, 15 years old is going to give an old man oral sex 100 times? Tell nobody.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I knew a lot of 12-year-olds who also claimed to be having sex with a lot of girls when that was farthest thing from the truth. But wait, when we say 100 times, I hate to even think about this graphically. You mean let's just say on 100 separate occasions this thing occurred?
Yes, that was his final testimony. But let me tell you how we got there.
Okay.
See, that's not how this whole thing starts. That's not what really happened here. Okay, let me tell you what really happened after having investigated this for far more time and effort than I ever possibly should have, because this has ruined my whole life. Here's what really happened with Aaron Fischer. He's a 15-year-old sex-crazed, girl-obsessed boy whose grades are starting to fall, and he is sick and damn tired of having Jerry Sandusky, who has taken an interest in him because he sees Aaron as an athlete with some potential and who's having some trouble in school. And so he's giving Aaron extra attention, and Aaron isn't liking it because Aaron wants to go have sex with girls. And his mom is a welfare queen alcoholic who all she wants is for Jerry to take care of Aaron so she can go out drinking. So she's got a night scheduled for drinking, and she can get away with this because Jerry is taking Aaron to an event. Aaron doesn't want to spend any more time with the old man Jerry, giving him grief about his grades. He'd rather go try to get some girls. So he tells his mom, I don't want to go with Jerry. They get into a fight. There's a witness to this, the next-door neighbor. And as part of a way to get out of going with Jerry that night, Aaron pulls the he makes me feel uncomfortable card. And the mom's like, what? Well, this immediately starts what I believe is the only quote-unquote conspiracy in this case. The mom, who had been involved in a case involving her brother being sexually abused by a guy by the name of Dr. Barry Bender, I believe immediately sees dollar signs here. And they don't go to the police. No, they go to the school where Jerry is a volunteer assistant coach. And they go to the school, and when Aaron is asked whether anything sexual happened, Aaron says no. Aaron tells the police nothing sexual ever happened. Aaron tells the caseworker nothing sexual ever happened. Aaron tells his therapist nothing sexual ever happened. It's not until the therapist, after several sessions, gets him to finally answer a yes or no question, did Jerry ever have oral sex with you? And Aaron mutters the word yes. This is way down the road here after this initial story. And then Aaron goes in front of the grand jury not once but twice and is unable to testify. He completely collapses. He can't answer a question. The grand jury doesn't believe him. They don't indict. It's not until the third time he testifies when he has to read his testimony with his therapist there in the room with him. Logically, I think the therapist wrote the testimony for him. He's reading his testimony to the grand jury, and then by the time the trial comes around, 4 years after this original story that Aaron told about being uncomfortable so he would get out of going with Jerry Sandusky one night, all of a sudden now it's 100 episodes of oral sex with Jerry Sandusky, which is just preposterous on every level, not to mention the fact that there's no evidence of it, not a shred of evidence, not a phone call. They tried surveillance phone calls. They tried to tape record phone calls between Jerry and Aaron. They got nothing, not a text message, not any semblance of DNA, not a semblance of pornography in this entire case. Jerry Sandusky's like the only pedophile in history in modern era with internet and email, everything else, not a shred of pornography. In fact, the only pornography in the entire case, Brian, was found not on Jerry Sandusky, but in the email of the prosecutors and the investigators passing back pornographic emails. They've caused a huge controversy and scandal in Pennsylvania, yet the media never mentioned, oh, by the way, they never found anything on Jerry. Because Jerry's not a pedophile. Jerry's a dope. I've interviewed him for 6 hours in prison, a half hour on the phone, 2 different occasions in prison, 2 different occasions on the phone. I've got dozens and dozens of letters from him. The guy is a naive, highly religious dope who didn't think anybody could possibly believe this, thought God was going to save him, never hired the proper attorney, got the world caved in on him when Joe Paterno was unfairly fired, and the entire world flips upside down. Everybody's incentives flips upside down, including Penn State's, including the Paterno family, including every Penn Stater. And Jerry Sandusky becomes not just a presumed pedophile, but he's the pedophile that killed Santa Claus. Because Joe Paterno not only gets fired, but then he dies 2 months later. And then the trial is over within 7 months of his arrest without one continuance. This was the Salem witch trial of 2012. And I bought into it like everybody else did because I was worried too much about the Paterno situation to even get into Sandusky. I thought, okay, there's no possible way. There's no possible way everybody could screw this up so badly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people from the sidelines. They probably took a look at it and said, all right, well, so there's some old guy that used to be on the staff, and he's hanging around the facility and something. That doesn't mean Joe Paterno had... Oh, leave Joe... Seriously, I know a lot of people that even on the surface could understand that version of the story, as opposed to, oh yeah, Joe Paterno knew, Joe Paterno covered it up, they were in on it together, it was their thing, But once again, talking about someone like Joe Paterno, let's compare it to somebody else famous, because this is where it gets interesting to me. Compare it to Bill Cosby. Obviously, there are some similarities and there are some differences, because these are both cases that are retroactively taking a famous person through the mud. So I'm kind of curious what you think, where it's similar and where it's different.
Okay, well, the Cosby thing is interesting, but let me just make clear about a couple things you said about Joe Paterno. The Joe Paterno angle of this doesn't make any flippin' sense. Forget about the fact that there's no evidence of it when there should be massive evidence. There should be OJ-like evidence in every aspect of this case, the cover-up as well as Sandusky's crimes, and yet there's nothing. And trust me, these people are not criminal masterminds. Just because Jerry Sandusky was a good defensive coordinator does not mean he's a criminal mastermind. Trust me, I've been on both sides of the fence of this case. He's not. He's the same dope on one side of the fence when I was trying to get him to confess in prison as he is on the other side of the fence when I'm trying to get him out of prison. All right, so that whole thing is ridiculous. Joe Paterno had no incentive. He never liked Jerry Sandusky. Jerry Sandusky was a former employee. If he had thought Jerry Sandusky was a pedophile and had evidence of it, there would have been zero blowback to Joe Paterno turning him in or making sure that he was brought up on charges or whatever it is, completely ostracized from the program. There would have been zero blowback. Joe Paterno would have been considered heroic for doing that. So it's an absurd theory on its face. Now to Cosby. What I find interesting about the Cosby comparison is this. While the similarities are, you're right, that there were very few, if any, contemporaneous reports against Cosby. When you look at just like with Sandusky, not one contemporaneous report to anybody, all right? When you look at the Cosby accusers, at least that I have seen, first of all, some of them apparently did tell friends at the time. None of the Sandusky accusers did that. That's an important distinction. Even more important, when these accusers of Cosby come forward, one, they do interviews, which only a couple of the Sandusky accusers did. Only one trial accuser, Aaron Fischer, did, and the interview was a joke done by Chris Cuomo of ABC. But when you look at the interviews that the Cosby accusers provide, number one, they're angry. They're emotional. They cry. They have dates. They have very specific recollections of what happened. So, to me, they are far more credible than any of the Sandusky accusers because the Sandusky accusers have none of that. And let me give an proof of that. Jerry Sandusky is currently appealing his conviction. There have been numerous hearings in the State College area for his appeal. There was even a chance at one point, there was some speculation, although I thought it was a long shot, but it was been theoretically possible, that the judge was going to let Sandusky out of prison because of these grand jury leaks that started the whole case, maybe invalidating the entire conviction. Now, you would think that with 8 guys who testified at trial and 32 guys who took money from Penn State as accusers, that one of them might show up, might be angry, pissed off enough to show up at one of these hearings to make sure that their voice is heard and that Sandusky doesn't get let out of prison. Guess what, Brian?
None.
Not one has shown up at any one of those hearings. Not one. Not one. And this is in a situation where the news media has protected these accusers beyond all comprehension. They have nothing to fear. They have been sanctified from moment one of the story. Penn State held a candlelight vigil with 10,000 people attending before anyone knew anything about the case. This was like 2 days after Joe Paterno was fired. And I got to tell you, the media protecting their identities has been key to this case not falling apart, because I know enough about these accusers to know that the people around them don't even know they're Sandusky accusers. And so no one around them can call bullshit. If every single one of their names was known, none of this would have been allowed to happen, because there would have been people close to every one of them going, what the fuck? What are you talking about? This guy was not a Sandusky accuser. He's not abused by Jerry Sandusky. So none of these Sandusky accusers give dates, except one. One gives a date, and the story is preposterous on 8 million levels. But there's no dates. There's no emotion. Aaron Fischer, in his television interview I mentioned with 2020, Chris Cuomo, he doesn't forget about crying or anger. He actually smiles when being asked about his memories of Jerry Sandusky. It's ridiculous. There is absolutely no comparison to the emotion and the detail that the Cosby accusers provide in their interviews and what any of the Sanduski accusers have done, whether it's in interviews or in their testimony in court. It's not even close.
Well, let's take that and roll that into Duke Lacrosse. It's something you brought up. You know, we've covered Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, over to Duke Lacrosse, trying to figure out this Jerry Sandusky story. But I think there's a really important lesson that our damn country needs to figure out already. The media especially, but we're the ones consuming it. It's like I was saying earlier, be careful when you're sharing information, when you're jumping to conclusions, you're rushing to judgments. Can you set us up and remind us again another sports thing that ESPN was heavily involved in pushing because it fit the college rape culture that they have envisioned, because it's been preached through so many of these left-wing professors in colleges? Remind us what happened with Duke Lacrosse, because there might be quite a few similarities between that and this case.
Well, you know, it's funny because Jay Billis of Duke, a basketball player who was vocal about defending Duke and helping Duke get out of that whole situation, has been completely unwilling to open his mind about Penn State. And I've spoken to Jay Billis for an extended period of time on the phone. The hypocrisy is extraordinary. But just to remind people what that story was, that there was a Duke Lacrosse party where they hired apparently a stripper, and the allegation was that a bunch of white lacrosse players raped a black stripper at a party, and it later turned out that the case never had any real merit, that the prosecutor was beyond corrupt, that the stripper lied. I think she actually ended up being convicted of murder later on, or maybe, I don't know if it was called murder, but I believe killing somebody. That was many years after the case, but there was, as it turned out, even after all these reputations destroyed, a lacrosse coach fired, very similarly to Joe Paterno, his career largely destroyed. At least he didn't die like Paterno. It turned out that the case was dismissed and there was no rape, although I would argue that what we know in the Duke Lacrosse case was far worse than what we know for sure with regard to Penn State and Jerry Sandusky, because at least there's photos of a stripper at a Duke Lacrosse party, which at least is something that shouldn't have happened. To my belief, there is literally nothing. The only thing that, you know, the essence of what really happened at Penn State was that Jerry Sandusky was stupid enough to shower naked with boys on an occasional basis, not nearly as often as the mythology that has been created would have people believe. The reason why he did this is because Jerry grew up in a rec home where nudity was very common. It was a different generation. This was before the Catholic Church scandal, which I believe changed everything. That's one of the more important elements of how people misperceive this case, because all the alleged events occurred before we ever knew about the Catholic Church scandal, but they came out in the public after. And so everyone saw them through the prism of the Catholic Church scandal and saw Penn State as the church and Joe Paterno as the Pope and Sanduski as a cardinal and the administration as the College of Cardinals, I guess. I don't know. But that all fit in the media's mindset and in a lot of the public, and it's all bullshit.
And it was an attempt to bash on and make fun of religion in the process, which ESPN loves to do.
Well, that's true. I mean, look, I share your wrath for ESPN, but I think it's really important that people understand how significant the timing here is. That when Jerry, for instance, was showering with a naked boy in 1998, which was fully investigated. The DA, which had no love for Penn State, found that nothing had happened. There were no charges. Jerry was completely exonerated in that. 1998. Pre-Catholic Church scandal in State College, Pennsylvania, literally, and I don't mean this with any hyperbole or exaggeration, 1998 in State College, Pennsylvania, culturally might as well be 1958, all right, as far as the naivete, the idea of Happy Valley, the idea that, you know, this is not a place where horrible things happen, and so a esteemed football coach taking a shower in a public shower, not, you know, this is not a situation where people wouldn't be able to walk in at any moment. You know, a very public shower on Penn State's campus with a kid and lifting him up to to wash the shampoo out of his hair is not scandalous. And by the way, with regard to the showering, and this is something that I've done hundreds of interviews on this case, but for some reason it never comes up. If Jerry Sandusky was supposedly using showering as his way of grooming and lathering kids up so he could have sex acts with them, why was there not one allegation at trial that Jerry Sandusky ever took a shower with a boy at his home? Not one. Why? Why would Jerry Sandusky, if that was his M.O., why would he only do that in public situations where he could easily be found out, and yet never once take a shower with a boy at home where he could easily get away with it? I would submit to you is because Jerry knew that would be obviously inappropriate to do it at home, but never thought of it as inappropriate in a public area like Penn State because of his background having grown up in a rec home. That makes sense. The story of Jerry Sandusky as a pedophile makes no flipping sense when you know the actual facts of the case. And the most ironic part of this whole thing, because I know most people think I'm crazy on this, is it's not even close. This case isn't even close. This is a the emperor has no clothes situation. And I'm the only guy who was in the circumstances to be able to see that there are no clothes and has the balls to say, hey, everybody, this case has no clothes. Despite what you've been being told, it's all a sham. It's all a big fraud. And it's not. It's patently obvious to anybody who looks at this closely. And in fact, an author came out this week finally with his investigation into the repressed memory therapy aspect of this case, and he wrote a very prominent article saying that he believes Jerry Sandusky is innocent. There's a prominent attorney in Northern California that's created a whole website based upon the idea that Jerry Sandusky is innocent, but he's so afraid of the blowback he won't even put his name out there. So I'm not alone here. I'm just the most vocal guy because I guess I'm too stupid to stay silent.
Well, you know, like I said, you know, I did a show on this. I formed my opinion. I could be wrong. Where would they've so you're saying that the rest of the media, they've staked too much of their too much.
They put everything on this.
Yeah, they let it all ride.
Yeah,
they put all their chips on black, and they said, you know, they picked a number at the roulette wheel. You mean that they would still go along with letting an old innocent man rot in prison, if not worse, because they made a mistake in the beginning instead of being like Gary Johnson saying, man, you said Aleppo, and I screwed that question up, but yeah, I know about Syria. And you go, oh, okay, I can at least understand how that could have happened. Is it just everybody's so they don't want to lose face and get egg on their face?
Well, here's the thing. I try on almost a daily basis to explain to members of the news media why they are wrong. They won't even listen. It's like
really?
You can't get out of the batter's box. Ironically, the guy who has probably almost without a doubt among the prominent media who has clearly had the most open mind and has given my research the most thought and the most credibility is Bob Costas. Now, the reason why that's ironic is that it was the Bob Costas interview with Jerry Sandusky, which is probably a large part of the reason why Jerry is in prison. Now, I don't know enough about Bob to know whether there's a connection there that maybe he feels more responsibility because of his role in all of this. And I'm not saying I know what Bob's beliefs are, but I communicate with Bob fairly regularly, and I can assure you that Bob knows more about the real facts of this case than anybody else in the major media, because at least he seems to care. Nobody else cares, and let's face it, this is an old story. It takes we've talked for almost an hour, and we've only basically hit the tip of the iceberg. It takes far too much time for me to explain what really happened here. I mean, my God, I'll give you a great example. I'm embarrassed to mention this. I briefly dated Christine Brennan many, many, many years ago. She's a columnist for USA Today, sports columnist, okay? She and I know each other very, very well. I've impacted her career in many ways. She wrote a book about figure skating. I gave her the title for. She started covering golf because I told her there was this amateur by the name of Tiger Woods that was going to change the world. She needed to get on the bandwagon, which she did. She has every reason to trust me, okay? 2 years ago at the PGA Championship, we hadn't seen each other in many years. She's been very anti-Penn State, very anti-Paterno, obviously anti-Sanduski. I sat down with her for like an hour and 15 minutes, and I explained the whole damn case to her. For about a year, she didn't write anything. And then when these bullshit settlement stories came out again, she immediately went back to the old tired crap narrative of the cover-up at Penn State and never even bothered to call or email me and say, hey, John, what's up here? When I could have easily told her, this proves what a farce the whole case is, because these stories were concocted by people who were outside the statute of limitations, which is 30 years old in the state of Pennsylvania. That's why these allegations against Paterno come in 1971 and 76, because those guys were too old to be within the statute of limitations. They were too old to be part of the Second Mile Charity, which didn't start until 1977. And if you weren't part of the Second Mile Charity and you were older than 30 years old, you had a major problem getting your settlement from Penn State, unless you did one thing: implicate Joe Paterno, in which case Penn State would immediately fold and hand you a check, and with the check they would say, by the way, we're not telling you this story is true, we're just paying you this money to go away. I have the contract. It's been made public. This was all a scam, and the reason why I'm sure it was a scam is that a fake victim came to me and said he wanted to make a claim, and I sent him to the most prominent attorney in the case, and he was not only believed, he was embraced, he was manipulated, the story was changed, and every single thing I anticipated about the bogus settlement process was proven true, and I've got it all on tape. I've got hours and hours of tape of this, but no one gives a crap because of this media narrative that we've discussed, where they've put, as you say, put all their chips on black, and anything that's not black they're just not going to accept. And so my point here is the story is too involved and too old, too cold, too dangerous, all risk, no reward for any major member of the news media to ever do anything about it, because, frankly, if Sanduski had been accused of killing people, he'd be in far better shape. Because in this case, in order for him to be innocent, you have to be willing to call these innocent, quote-unquote, innocent accusers and victims in the media's mind, you have to be willing to say that they lied. And the media will never do that.
Hey, but wait a second. Hillary Clinton did that. She got that boy off. What was that little case? It was that 13-year-old girl that got raped, and she's laughing about it on the old... I mean, Hillary does that. It's okay.
Right, I understand, but we're living in a different world. It's a fairly good point, by the way. But the reality is that that Making of the Murderer guy from Netflix. That guy is guilty as fuck, and his victim is dead, and his family has to sit around and have it be put out there that he didn't really kill her. But the media doesn't care about that. But because we've got these supposedly innocent accusers out there, they can't be forced to suffer again. Let me tell you how much they're suffering, Brian. I got Facebook photos of every single one of them. They're all driving multiple big-time sports cars. Most of them are going on gambling trips on a regular basis. They're all married. They're all thrilled. They're going trips, partying, not telling anybody where they got their money, lying about where they got their money, claiming that they're doing careers that they're not really doing. Jerry's going to die probably in the next couple of years in prison, just based upon how old he is and how they're treating him in prison and just the basic realities. His last great gift to the Second Mile kids that he devoted his life to is that 32 of them have been given a boatload of money to do. I'm sure they're all going to blow it, but that's a hell of a gift. That's going to be his ultimate legacy, is that they betrayed him and got a total of $93 million at this point for making up a story about him. And you know what? My guess is, knowing what I know about Jerry Sandusky, he's probably on his deathbed, probably going to be thinking that that's a positive thing. That his suffering probably made these kids happy, and if that's the case, then maybe it wasn't all for naught. But it wasn't justice. I can assure you that.
So we got the Santa Claus figure of Joe Paterno. Then would this make Jerry Sandusky the Christ figure? And then these are the pieces of silver. These are the disciples, the doubting Thomases, the Judases that are selling him out for a fancy sports car and a gambling junket.
You know, it's interesting you say that because in letters, Jerry has compared himself to Jesus to me. And at first, when I thought he was guilty, I thought that meant he was crazy as fuck. and then as I learned more about the case, I realized that that's actually a decent analogy. But I mean, I'm not a religious person. Jerry is, and I don't think he meant it in a megalomaniac sort of way. Although at the time I thought he might have, because at the time I thought he was guilty.
So you went in there convinced he was guilty.
I think there's something to what you just said.
You went in there convinced he was guilty?
Yeah, I presumed he was guilty, and then I spent a year trying to prove that he was guilty because my gut was telling me this is not possible, and I couldn't live with myself. I went on the Today Show and effectively declared him guilty with Matt Lauer asking me 3 times, and I finally, because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to convict him, but I finally effectively did. And then I spent a year plus trying to disprove my gut instinct. I couldn't do it, so I went back into prison again. Wow. And with Dottie and Jerry together, and by that point I was completely convinced. And then everything that's happened since then, but there's not one thing in this case that makes me go, well, gee, I can't explain that. Not one.
Do you think it will be overturned? Does your gut instinct say that they're going to get it right?
No, because Jerry won't live long enough for this to get into a court that will be fair. A federal court's the only place that could possibly be fair. A Pennsylvania court will never be fair.
Has anybody petitioned sports fan Barack Obama to make this happen on his way out the door? No, I'm not kidding around. He loves sticking his nose into everything.
No politician is ever going to touch this in any way, shape, or form.
Even a lame duck president walking out the door. Lame duck president walking out the door with a huge penchant for following sports.
Even Bill Clinton, with Mark Rich's pardon, wouldn't do this with Jerry Sandusky.
Yeah,
there's
probably
no sex involved for him.
Yeah, Jerry Sandusky is kind of the Fukushima of stories. It's not very attractive to go out and. Well, anyhow, I digress. All right, well then, look, we've had you on for about the amount of time we normally do. I'll let you get going, but what I've done is I've made a whole bunch of questions. Maybe we could get you back on again, and I could get some kind of sort this out, because this is a total paradigm shift, and I hate using that phrase, sorry, but this really has me going, there's no way. Now I'm in the same boat you're going. Say, I gotta get to the bottom of this. There's no way a totally innocent
Brian,
guy.
And I'm happy to talk to you anytime. Maybe I can do it in studio. I live in the Los Angeles area, but go to framingpaterno.com and let's set it up again. There's going to be a big story this coming week with the honoring of Joe Paterno, which I believe is totally overblown in the game against Temple. But I'm happy to talk about it anytime, any place, and all I ask is that people listen with an open mind, because if they do, I know you'll eventually believe what I do, which is the truth.
Well, thank you for all of that. And do you think that Paterno, as they remember him, you think his legacy will ever be restored separately from Sandusky, or he's permanently ruined by this too?
Nope. The only irony is the only way Joe Paterno ever gets restored is if Jerry Sandusky gets exonerated, and Joe Paterno's own family, because of his son named Scott Paterno, has made that impossible, and that's going to be the great tragedy of the Paterno family forever. They trying to be politically correct and embrace a false narrative, which Joe asked them not to do on his deathbed, will completely screw Joe Paterno's legacy forever and ever. A man who did nothing wrong. In fact, if he did anything wrong, he was actually too tough on Jerry Sandusky, which is maybe something we can get into next time we talk. Okay?
All right, sounds like a plan. Hey, John Ziegler, thank you very much for your time. And I guess the best place to follow you, you have those couple of websites. Give everybody one last chance, other than the Sanduski site you already mentioned.
Well, on Twitter, Zygmunt Freud with a Z, Zygmunt Freud, and my website, johnziegler.com, and my radio show is freespeechbroadcasting.com. You can contact me through there.
Excellent. John, you have a great evening. Thank you so much for your time, and go Buckeyes. Can I say that, since we're talking Big Ten
football?
I
actually used to be a sportscaster in Steubenville, Ohio, so I covered the Buckeyes. Okay. I got no problem with the Buckeyes, so yeah, go Bucks.
All right, I'll take it. John, thank you so much for your time. You have a great day. And seriously, I had no idea that there was a second side to this story, everybody. I really didn't know. Maybe it's kind of like John Ziegler was just saying. You hear the story and you kind of process it, you take it in, you make your determination, and you just put it away and you go, all right, that story's done. And it takes so much time to unpack it and kind of unravel it backward. But really, think about it. Here's the main point I want every one of you to consider. I want you to go back and think about the things, and some of these interviews I have a ton of time to get prepped for. I get a lot of time to put a game plan together. This one I didn't, but sometimes when you don't have a game plan, it's really fun to not have a game plan. I gotta tell you, I really just like going that way, because you let the conversation develop the way that it's supposed to develop, and I'm actually a big fan of that. But what do we have? We had Duke Lacrosse. This was a situation where everybody rushed to judgment and blamed these people, and there was a racial component in it. We did bring up Michael Brown with the hands up, don't shoot that never happened. We talked about the photographs and the actual ages of the boys in the Penn State molestation case compared to Trayvon Martin and the little angelic baby-faced pictures you were given several years before a much taller and larger Trayvon Martin got into the altercation that he did. On down the line, people are not taking enough time to slow down. Instead of throwing the first stone, let he who is among you without sin cast the first stone. I mean, this is just ridiculous. These are damn near lynch mobs. I mean, we have seen it in the racial component of the past 5 years. That's not even to say the Jerry Sandusky case is racial. I just mean, don't rush to judgment on anything. You gotta wait and sort the details out. Nobody knows it in advance. So I'll tell you what, I'll raise my hand. I was guilty of knowing everything about this story in advance. And guess what? I might have been wrong. So I will reconsider, and we'll probably talk with John again. For everybody out there in the TNAM radio network, I appreciate you. I love you. My name's Brian Engelman. We'll do this again soon. Have a great night.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to Agree to Disagree with Brian Engelman, and this is John B. Wells reminding you that not only is Brian Engelman a cool guy, and not only is TheNewAmericanMedia.com a very cool platform, but here's a cool idea for you, too. Are you alone? Not really. Do you like dogs? Do you like cats? You do. Of course you do. Everybody does. One or the other, maybe even both. You know, there are a lot of dogs and cats that are at shelters right now, and if somebody doesn't take them home, they're going to wind up euthanized. That's a nice way of saying they're going to be killed, because there's simply not enough room. I guarantee it, the best dogs and the best cats, the best pets, come from shelters. There's something about dogs and cats. They know. They know where they are. You walk through one of them, and certainly at least one is going to look at you and go, I wish you'd take me home. I'm in hell. Please take me out of here. It'll be the best thing that you ever did for your soul. You'll feel good about it. And not only that, but you have a friend for life. Doesn't matter if you got money, you don't have money. Well, it doesn't make any difference to a dog or cat. All they need is the sound of your voice and maybe even the stroke of your hand, and they're fine. Maybe a little food every once in a while. The sweetest sound that those pets ever hear is your voice. Think it over and adopt a cat or a dog from a local shelter today. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did.